Take Fivers, I want to welcome you back to the second portion of our session. I hope you've had a chance now to view Katie's excellent presentation. And if so, you'll have lots of good insight into the novel. I sure know that watching her presentation has given me a new perspective on different matters. I'd like to just make some quick introductions. Katie, I've already introduced her. Verby and Hugh Prevost. You've seen them many times. Verby, the previous head of the English department and previous Connor Professor of American Literature. Hugh Prevost, the Director of Study Abroad and Cooperative Education at UTC. And our fifth panelist will not be able to make it, though he has submitted commentary, and this is Cliff Cleveland, whom you know all so well. Cliff, as you may know, if you've been reading up in the Chattanooga Times Free Press, has suffered a fall. He's doing just fine. He's recuperating now. But loved the novel, wanted to submit some commentary, and I'll be glad to read that after Verby offers her thoughts on the novel. And so without further ado, let me turn the time over to Verby.
Thanks, Aaron. There's so many things to talk about with Crossing to Safety that choosing one was difficult. But I've decided to focus my remarks primarily on the discussions about writing that pervade the novel. As he frequently does, Stegner makes Larry Morgan, his major character, as well as his narrator in Crossing to Safety, a writer. And, as one might well expect, Larry Morgan muses frequently about writing and about what it means to be a writer. Crossing to Safety, like most of Stegner's novels, combines autobiography and fiction. There are many passages that make us feel that Larry and Stegner are one and the same, even though we know, of course, they are not. But when it comes to Larry's reflections on writing, it's hard not to think of them as Stegner's being self-reflexive, self-referential. Stegner often seems to use Larry to present the views of writing that he himself holds, but he also uses Larry to reflect openly upon the actual process of composition within this work, to confront directly the artificiality of the work he is creating. In a rather lengthy passage, which I'm going to read, Larry discusses the story he is telling, is writing, if you will. I feel that this is one of those passages where Stegner totally takes over and becomes, at least momentarily, Larry. Quote, "Human lives seldom conform to the conventions of fiction. Chekhov says that it's in the beginnings and endings of stories that we are most tempted to lie. I know what he means, and I agree. But we're sometimes tempted to lie elsewhere, too. I could probably be tempted to lie just here. This is a crucial place for the dropping of hints and the planting of clues. The crucial moment for hiding behind the piano or in the bookcase, the revelations that later, to the reader's gratified satisfaction, I will triumphantly discover if I'm after drama. Drama demands the reversal of expectation, but in such a way that the first surprise is followed by an immediate recognition of inevitability. And inevitability takes careful pin setting. Since this story is about a friendship, drama expects friendship to be overturned. Sometimes the novelist in me whispers that it's going to break up our cozy foursome. Given the usual direction of contemporary fiction and the usual contemporary notion of human character and conduct, what more plausible than that Sid Lang, a rampant male married to a somewhat unmalleable wife, should be tempted by Sally's softer nature? I've already dropped to a hint of that by recalling my uneasiness about their skinny dipping. The possibilities are diverse, for friendship is an ambiguous relationship. I might be attracted to Charity. She is an impressive woman, though I can't quite imagine myself smitten by her, or her by me. There are other possibilities too. Sid with me, Charity with Sally. We could get Vera Bloomsbury in our foursome. Anything to get this equilibrium of 2 and 2 overturned. Well, too bad for drama. Nothing of this sort is going to happen. Something less orthodoxly dramatic is. End quotation. And here's where we could really get into a rabbit hole. How do you separate the author and the narrator? How do you separate fiction and real life? Are they so intertwined that there is no separation? Isn't every piece of so-called fiction part history and part imagination creation? Isn't every so-called history part imagination, creation, interpretation, as well as part fact, reality? In Crossing to Safety, Larry thinks about his first novel, which he describes as an autobiographical novel. Quote, Sally knows that I wrote the last chapters of this book in tears, typing as fast as I could, and unable to type as fast as the words wanted to come. She knows I wept some more, revising it. It had been corked up a good while. The story of my decent, undistinguished, affectionate, abruptly dead father and mother, and the glamorous friend who periodically brought excitement, adventure, and romance into our house in Albuquerque, who kept them up late with stories of far places, who used them and sponged on them and borrowed money from them that they knew he would never pay back, and who, finally, in one of his large gestures of half-drunken goodwill, took them up for an anniversary joyride in a plane that should have been in the shop. The ending was appropriate for him, but not for them. It was not the right reward for generosity and devotion. Yet now, having held in grief and resentment, and evaded thinking too much about the episode that changed my life with the finality of an axe, here I am, exalted by having made use of it, by having spilled my guts in public. We are strange creatures, and writers are stranger creatures than most. End quote. Larry's novel, like Stegner's best novels, is clearly autobiographical, and his reactions to having used this personal material, even in a changed form, seems to be ambivalent. An almost apologetic acknowledgement of having spilled his guts, but simultaneously a sense of exaltation over having done so. The story that Larry tells here of his father's death differs from the one that Stegner tells in another autobiographical novel, and both differ from the real life story of his father's death. But maybe all are equally true. Larry, like Stegner, also seems consciously aware that he is interpreting, fictionalizing events that he recalls, such as his father's death. At one point, Larry says, recollection, I have found, is about half invention. Because of time constraints, I can't possibly deal with all of the passages in Crossing to Safety that talk about writing, but I must point out one of my favorites. This is a passage where Larry is recalling his first meeting of charity at a party. He says, quote, between the taking of a cinnamon toast and tea, obvious allusion here, of course, to T.S. Eliot's A Love Song of J. Prufrock, and by the way, pointing out all of the literary allusions in this novel would take at least a few hours. Between the taking of a cinnamon toast and tea, she let drop bits of information that my mind scurried to gather up and plaster against the wall for future use, like a Bengali woman gathering cow dung for fuel. This combination of allusion and metaphor, or simile if you want to be more precise, is so representative of the absolutely astounding ways in which Stegner puts together words and ideas and literary devices. Larry and Stegner is being self-deprecating in comparing himself to Prufrock, but certainly he is showing more life and spunk than Prufrock as he envisions himself taking ideas and plastering them against the wall, rather than feeling himself to be the one who is pinned on the wall. Prufrock says, and when I am formulated, sprawling on a pen, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? Prufrock, numbered by hopelessness, despair, meaninglessness, ponders how he can spit out the butt ends of his days and ways. Larry Morgan, on the other hand, speaks of bits of life in a seemingly similar negative way with his reference to gathering cow dung. But he sees this cow dung, these bits of life, not as something used up, ready to be thrown away, but as fuel. There is energy, hopefulness, purpose, meaning, all of which leads me to another theme that this novel so forcefully suggests, and one that Katie has clearly suggested in her presentation. The concept of acceptance, making the most of what comes your way and feeling satisfied with it. The novel endorses learning to be okay with your life, the life that you are given, and making the most of it. It suggests that as humans, no matter what comes our way, we're not to feel like we're pinned and wriggling on the wall, because we still have the capacity to create, to live purposefully and meaningfully. Crossing to Safety is about appreciating what life offers us and moving on when our plans fall through. Accepting and loving friends, even when we sometimes don't like them or what they do. It's about enjoying what you have. A wife who is severely handicapped, rather than obsessing over what could have been had she not contracted polio. Larry Morgan at one point in the novel says to his wife, Sally, "But if I'm going to set the literary world on fire, the only way to do it is to rub one word against the other." And wow, in his creation of Larry Morgan, as well as his other characters, Stegner effectively rubs one word against the other.
Verby, thanks a bunch for that. I'm going to follow up with some remarks by Cliff Cleveland. And if you've been attending previous Take 5 sessions, you know that Cliff Cleveland is our resident physician. And so it won't surprise you in a novel that showcases polio as much as it does, that what Cliff has to say deals exactly with that. So let me read his commentary here. Two diseases, polio, which afflicts Sally Morgan, and gastric cancer, which ends the life of Charity Lang, figure prominently in Wallace Stegner's superb novel, Crossing to Safety. This essay, or these remarks, deal with polio, or poliomyelitis, as it's called, and it's a highly infectious disease caused by a single-strand RNA virus. Descriptions of the disease date to ancient times. Epidemics of polio became widespread in Europe and North America from the 1880s, peaking in summer months and resulting in muscular paralysis of varying severity. Many patients died from paralysis of respiratory muscles. Polio may be spread from person to person in respiratory droplets, ingestion of contaminated water, or from ingestion of food that has been contaminated by fecal contact. The incubation period ranges from 2 to 20 days. The virus establishes itself in the digestive tract. From there, the virus migrates to the throat. Live virus is excreted in feces. Most infected persons have no symptoms. 5% will develop fever, headaches, and muscular aching. In a small percent of those persons, the virus attacks cells in the nervous system which control movement. This group will develop paralysis of varying intensity, usually affecting the legs. Some victims may recover. Others will have permanent muscular paralysis or weakness. If respiratory muscles are attacked, a person may require placement in an iron lung. Such was the fate of Sally Morgan. Sally experienced an abrupt onset of severe headache and fever. Once in hospital, she spent time in an iron lung, and later she convalesced at Warm Springs, Georgia, site of President Franklin Roosevelt's Little White House. Permanent paralysis of her legs required leg braces for the rest of her life. Annual outbreaks of polio generated panic in the US. Cinemas, swimming pools, and other public places were closed. The worst epidemic year in our country was 1952, when 58,000 cases were reported with 3,200 deaths and 21,000 cases of mild to severe paralysis. Wowee. In 1921, FDR suffered a paralytic illness attributed at the time to polio, and that it resulted in paraplegia. His illness led to the formation of an annual drive, the March of Dimes, and the establishment of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. Funds generated by the two provided vital support for research into a polio vaccine. In the early 1930s, 2 polio vaccines were described at medical conferences. Controversies ended both efforts, however, and trials of another oral vaccine began in 1950. Jonas Salk, a medical researcher at the University of Pittsburgh, led a team that developed an injectable vaccine which utilized killed virus. After extensive testing, the Salk vaccine was released in 1955. A booster injection was recommended. Tragedy followed when a batch of vaccine containing live virus from Cutter Labs led to polio in hundreds of recipients and varying paralysis in 200 and in several deaths. Vaccines produced by other labs were safe and drastically reduced the annual polio outbreaks. Dr. Albert Sabin led a Cincinnati-based team in the development of an oral polio vaccine. This was based upon live weakened polio virus. Upon its release in 1962, the Sabin vaccine became widely accepted because of ease of administration. Surprisingly, Dr. Salk and Sabin never received a Nobel Prize for their discoveries. Because in rare instances, the oral vaccine may lead to polio, an injectable vaccine with spaced boosters is the recommended protocol for vaccine prevention today. By 1979, polio had been eradicated in the US. A worldwide campaign led by the World Health Organization has almost eliminated polio. I should say that David Orshinsky's book, Polio, An American Story, presents a vivid history of the disease in our country. Cliff ends with this quote, crucial to Sally's survival was the tender care and encouragement provided by charity during the time Sally was in an iron lung. Larry Morgan's abiding love and steadfast assistance with braces and ambulation allowed the couple to make an amazing adaptation to Sally's disability, even getting them all the way to Florence, Italy, in leg braces and everything. So these are Cliff's remarks, and I'll follow up with some remarks. I'm gonna talk a little bit about chaos and order. These are 2 contending forces, and if sometimes you have a hard time distinguishing one from the other, I can't help but wonder if that's part of Wallace Stegner's design in the first place. But maybe to begin this talk of chaos and order, I'd like to go back to, in my version, this is going to be page 12. And this is how the first chapter ends. If you remember, this is sort of a frame story. We begin in the early 70s with Charity sick and Sally in leg braces. They're going to see her one last time. And in the very last paragraph of this opening chapter, right before we're whisked back to early 1930s Madison, Wisconsin, we get this. In high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a bunch of us spent a whole year reading Cicero, De Senectute on old age, De Amicitia on friendship. So both of these works by Cicero. De Senectute, with all its resigned wisdom, I will probably never be capable of living up to or imitating. But Amicitia, De Amicitia, I could make a stab at. That's the one by Cicero on friendship. I could take a stab at it and could have any time and could have done so in the last 34 years. So he frames this with a reference to classical Roman literature and just a little bit of context for De Amicitia, written by Cicero, one of the great orators of the late Republic. De Amicitia deals with a death just like this novel does, or an impending death in the case of Stegner. But in the case of Amicitia, it is observing the death of Scipio Africanus, the great Roman general and statesman, and his friends who who are so saddened by his death then join in a conversation that Cicero constructs. And from the example of the late Scipio, we are able to pull out a number of friendships, or excuse me, a number of traits of true friendships, some of which are friendship can only exist between good people. No life is worth living without the mutual love of friends. These are things that you learn from Cicero. Friends need to be frank with one another. Sometimes I wonder if with that snake in the garden that Katie mentions, if sometimes maybe a little more frankness on the part of the Morgans could have been a helpful remedy when charity is their most rigid. But these are all things that come on the wake of a death. But that gets me to thinking about these other issues of chaos and order. And as I think about this novel couldn't have been written about friendship if Larry at an earlier time in his life had not felt a certain kind of friendship betrayal. Not his own personal friendship, but the friendship between some unnamed man and his parents. And this is going to take us to a quote that a passage that Verby has already read, but that I think bears repeating in this context of friendship and how it sort of spins Larry into a world of chaos. And I think he's haunted by this chaos started by a friendship gone wrong. And that helps to explain why he has such an affinity for charity and for Sid. So this is back to page 108, if you'll bear with me as I read it again. Sally knows I wrote the last chapters of this book in tears, typing as fast as I could and unable to type as fast as the words wanted to come. She knows I wept some more revising it. It had been corked up a good while, the story of my decent, undistinguished, affectionate, abruptly dead father and mother, and the glamorous friend who periodically brought excitement, adventure, and romance into our house in Albuquerque, who kept them up late with stories of far places, who used them and sponged on them, and borrowed money from them that they knew he would never pay back, and who finally, in one of his large gestures of half-drunken goodwill, took them up for an anniversary joyride in a plane that should have been in the shop. The ending was appropriate for him, but not for them. It was not the right reward for generosity and devotion. So as poor Larry's life is spun into chaos, losing his mother and father so unexpectedly at still a fairly young age, you can see how the friendship that he and Sally both have with Charity and Sid is in many ways trying to get right what went wrong, so deeply wrong, with his parents and this unnamed gallant friend. But as far as chaos goes, it makes me think about how friendship is, at least on, on the surface, there to smooth the rough edges of chaos. At the same time, theoretically, that may be the case, but it may not always work out that way. And so I want to come to one passage on page 36 and 37 in my version. And this is at the bottom of page 36. What the disorderly crave above everything is order. What the dislocated aspire to is location. Reading my way out of disaster in the Berkeley Library, I had run into Henry Adams. Chaos, he told me, is the law of nature. Order is the dream of man. No one had ever put my life to me with such precision, and when I read the passage to Sally, she heard it the same way I did. Because of her mother's uncertain profession, early divorce, and early death, she had been first dragged around and farmed out, and later deposited in the care of overburdened relatives. I had lost my security. She had never had any. Both of us were peculiarly susceptible to friendship. When the Langs opened their house and their hearts to us, we crept gratefully in. So again, here you can see that what friendship should do ideally is be able to bring a sense of order to a chaotic world. The problem, of course, with charity, and Katie, I couldn't explain this any better than you did in your terrific presentation, is that in the very, in the very search for order, it becomes really kind of a, as Wallace Stevens might say, a rage for order. And so sometimes the dividing line between order and chaos gets very, very blurry indeed. When, for example, charity insists on unpacking all of the provisions just to make sure that that tea has been packed, you can see how it sets off this sense of tension, not just between Sid and Charity, but between all four of them really. And it, as Katie says, kind of puts everybody to the test. There are these moments where things get quite chaotic, and as Katie's also pointed out, Charity's rage for order has even put her in, you know, in a sanitarium for a while. But I do agree with Katie that this foursome does pass that test. That let's face it, the dream of order is just that, a dream, and even with the best of friends, chaos will, at least at times, prevail. And so thank God for these friends and for all of mine, and sure all of yours listening to this, who helped to smooth off those rough edges of chaos. Hugh, you were next.
Thank you, Aaron. First, I want to say I thoroughly enjoyed reading Stegner's Crossing to Safety. Like others who may have been introduced to a great deal of American literature, I was not, however, introduced to Stegner. But after reading Crossing to Safety and appreciating the quality of his writing, I will quickly add more of his books to my reading list and probably become a devotee. One of the aspects of the novel that kept ringing through my head as I read it, especially when we were in the Vermont woods, was Stegner's vast knowledge of and appreciation of the environs around him, wherever he might find himself. His oeuvre and his Crossing to Safety show Stegner as a true lover of the natural world. Before I discuss the novel, however, let me discuss Stegner's devotion to environmentalism that inspired many of his students and friends and his works, even one like Wendell Berry, who took the message to heart and developed it even more in his novels and essays. Stegner joined the conservation movement in the 1950s while fighting the construction of a dam on the Dinosaur National Monument's Green River. In 1960, he wrote a famous wilderness letter on the importance of federal protection of wild places. This letter was used to introduce the Wilderness Act, which established the National Wilderness Preservation System in 1964. In 61, due in large part to the public appreciation of his letter, Stegner was appointed assistant to Stuart Udall, Secretary of State of the Department of the Interior under President Kennedy. From 62 to 66, Stegner served on the National Parks Advisory Board. He felt other environmental problems would occur as multi-purpose land use increased. Let me quote a passage from his letter, The Geography of Hope, the Wilderness Letter. What I want to speak for is not so much the wilderness uses, valuable as those are, but the wilderness idea, which is a resource in itself. Being an intangible and spiritual resource, it will seem mystical to the practical minded, but then anything that cannot be moved by a bulldozer is likely to seem mystical to them. I want to speak for the wilderness idea as something that has helped form our character and that has certainly shaped our history as a people. Something will have gone out of us as a people if we ever let the remaining wilderness be destroyed. If we permit the last virgin forest to be turned into a comic book and plastic cigarette cases, if we drive the few remaining members of the wild species into zoos or into extinction, if we pollute the last clear air and dirty the last clean streams and push our paved roads through the last of the silence, so that never again will Americans be free in their own country from the noise, the exhaust, the stinks of human and automotive waste. And so that never again can we have the chance to see ourselves single, separate, vertical, and individual in the world, part of the environment of trees and rocks and soil, brother to other animals, part of the natural world and competent to belong in it. Without any remaining wilderness, we are wholly committed to a headlong drive into our technological termite life, the brave new world of a completely man-controlled environment. End quote. An important aspect of this book and of Stegner's fiction is his ability to create and appreciate a sense of place. You experience it not only in the people, but in the places where they live. We see and hear it in Larry's musings on his return to Battle Pond, after arriving back in Vermont to see Charity for what will become the last time. Larry gets up early, walks out of the cabin, up the road and through the woods, and records. No lights through the trees, no smell of kindling smoke on the air. I go out on the spongy woods path, past the woodshed and into the road. And there I meet the sky, faintly brightening in the east, and the morning star steady as a lamp. Down under the hemlocks, I thought it overcast, but out here I see the bowl of the sky pale and spotless. It's a road I've traveled 100 of times, a lovely lost tunnel through the trees, busy this morning with birds and little shy rustling things, my favorite road anywhere. We didn't come back to Battle Pond this time for pleasure. We came out of affection and family solidarity as adopted members of a clan. And because we were asked for and expected. But I can't feel somber now, any more than I could when I awoke in the shabby old guest house. Quite the reverse. I wonder if I've ever felt more alive, more competent in my mind, and more at ease with myself and my world. In this passage, through Larry's musings, you might hear Stegner's record of his love and reverence for nature. As an idyllic song, Larry later muses, I am struck as I walk up on Whiteman Road by its changelessness. The light is nostalgic about the mornings past and optimistic about the mornings to come. The romantic idyllic? Yes. Poetry? Yes. Healing? Yes. It is the stuff that a life of hope and a future are built on. One critic says, the beating heart of that world is Battle Pond, the Lang's discreet and understated family compound in Vermont, like something out of the Hudson River School of Painting, uniting the philosophical contemplative with the pastoral picturesque. It's not a resort, it's the antithesis of a resort. And in this idyllic setting, there is one character who fits in naturally, a true natural man, Sid. Yes, Larry appreciates it, is allured by it, is comforted by it, but Sid is it. Larry describes, Sid breathes it in, sucks it in through his pores. If there was a romantic who should not have studied with Irving Babbitt, he's the one. He is more Hudson River than Asher Duran, more transcendentalist than Emerson, more akin to the fox than Thoreau. Sid fits into nature like a true atom, a natty bumpo galloping through the woods, effortless and comfortably. But as Stegner alluded to in his Wilderness Letter, and as Katie pointed out in her discussion of the novel and its Edenic theme, there is a snake, or some snakes, that appear in this idyllic world. We are first introduced to one snake on Sid's initial entrance into the Battelle Pons paradise, where at the dinner table, Comfort brings up a possible change in their beautiful porch view because developers have their eyes on the land across the lake that's just as idyllic as theirs. Quote, "It's just all wild woods, but some criminal bunch, some syndicate wants to buy it and put in cabin camp for transients, and a dock, and a gas station, and a store, maybe even a movie house, and a dance hall." One snake has reared its ugly head. But who comes to the rescue? The natural man, Sid. With his inherited money and his love for Charity and his newly adopted family, he buys the land so that they can preserve the hope of adding on to the existing paradise. Additionally, Stegner also suggests that man and woman can work havoc with nature when he or she is left unchecked. Using a quote that Aaron has used, early in the novel, Larry quotes historian Henry Adams. "Chaos is the law of nature. Order is the dream of man." This is, I think, another theme, one of the major themes of the novel. It's not for nothing that Charity is established as the extreme organizer. She has absolute faith in organization, one that is never dimmed even by evidence to the contrary. Her life's charge: if you wanted something, you planned for it, worked for it, made it happen. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. That is exactly what happens to the new plot of land across the lake. It is organized, planned, mapped out according to Charity's plan. Not as the syndicate would have done it, but as Charity plans it and designs it. Larry records his somewhat condemning survey of the land on the afternoon of the picnic, after Charity has been whisked away to the hospital or hospice home, and as he climbs to search for Sid, who, as you remember, has fled to his natural habitat. "So I went for a quarter of a mile up or so, up the hay road that Sid and Charity use as a shortcut to the picnic site, through the gate, along a warm, fragrant tunnel under the balsams, and into the empty meadow that Charity had bulldozed for a playing field. It seemed to me an absolutely characteristic Charity artifact." This, mapped out according to Charity's plan, happens to almost everything and everyone in the novel. But let me return to nature and the nature ideal for my conclusion. For me, there is so many echoes of Thoreau and Walden everywhere in this novel, but for lack of time, I can't go there. Maybe another time. Let me instead quote one of William Yeats's poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. Not just because Sid quotes from it when he's asked by Aunt Emily of his ambition, but because I think it encapsulates the idea and ideal of nature that Stegner outlines in his Wilderness Letter and his presentation of nature's healing and spiritual influence in Crossing to Safety. "I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of morning to where the cricket sings. There, midnight's all a glimmer, and noon is as noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. I believe Katie has concluding remarks.
Yes, I began by wondering about the title of the novel. Crossing to Safety is not a common phrase. Stegner takes the title from a short poem by Robert Frost, and the title of that poem is I Could Give All to Time. The theme of the poem is also one of the main themes of Stegner's novel, one I did not address in my lecture: the losses we all experience over time, the things that the passage of time takes away from us. It's the short poem, I Could Give All to Time, so I'll read it in its entirety. This is by Robert Frost. To time, it never seems that he is brave to set himself against the peaks of snow, to lay them level with the running wave, nor is he overjoyed when they lie low, but only grave, contemplative, and grave. What now is inland shall be ocean isle, then eddies playing round a sunken reef, like the curl at the corner of a smile. And I could share time's lack of joy or grief at such a planetary change of style. I could give all to time except what I myself have held. But why declare the things forbidden that while the customs slept, I have crossed to safety with? For I am there, and what I would not part with, I have kept. Frost emphasizes the power of time to transform everything, even the earth itself. Time levels mountains, submerges continents. As a human being, he anticipates that time will exact everything from him, everything he has and everything he is, dispassionately, without joy or regret. Time, he implies, is simply an impersonal, irresistible force. Yet he suggests that he has the power to cheat time, to cross to safety with some of his possessions intact, while the customs sleep, because he would not, does not wish to, surrender these things. What are they? Surely not temporal things, none of which can withstand the ravages of time. He's speaking, I think, of precious memories that comfort him and give him peace of mind in the face of loss. I was reminded of the 5th century consolation of philosophy of Boethius, in which Boethius, unjustly imprisoned by his enemies, laments to his comforter, Lady Philosophy, that he has lost everything: possessions, high office, family, and friends. Philosophy tells him that he has lost only the gifts of fortune, and that therefore he has lost nothing of real value. When Boethius asks what is left to him, she says, yourself and your mind. A strong man, she suggests, needs and can expect nothing more than that. I think that Stegner is suggesting something similar. In the course of the novel, we watch as time robs the 4 friends of so many things: their jobs, their youth, Sally's health, Charity's life. Some critics have even found in this the main emphasis of the work. It is, they say, a novel about the depredations of time. Its message is that there is no safety. But time can only change the landscape, not destroy it. Stegner borrows from the poem to let us know that there are things he himself has held that enable him to face his losses with equanimity. His memories of love and friendship, memorialized in this novel, sustain him and can never be taken from him. He still has himself and his mind.
Katie, thank you for that. Verby and Hugh, thank you for that as well. This concludes our second phase of this session on crossing to safety. There will be another phase of this session when we invite you to be live participants in a discussion, and you will be getting some postcards on that very soon. In the meantime, Verby and Hugh and Katie and a few others are talking about how a set of sessions would be possible. I'm about to lose my battery. I'm sorry. I've got to rush faster. This can be disastrous. There we go. We're in conversation about how to extend Take 5 into the spring semester, spring of 2021. And so please stay tuned for more information on that. In the meantime, thank you once again for joining us, and happy reading.